The cardboard box was heavier than it looked, the bottom reinforced with layers of yellowing packing tape that had begun to peel at the corners like dead skin. Elena sat on the hardwood floor of her new apartment, the space still echoing with the hollow, expectant silence of a life not yet unpacked. Outside, the London rain streaked against the glass in long, erratic lines, blurred by the city lights into ribbons of amber and gray. She had been looking for the kettle, or perhaps the box of mismatched towels, but she had found this instead. It had been tucked into the back of the linen closet, a relic of 3 moves and 5 years of carefully curated forgetting. When she pulled the flaps back, she didn't find linens. She found paper. Dozens upon dozens of envelopes, some thick and bulging, others mere scraps of hotel stationery tucked into folded pages. They were all addressed to her. None of them had a stamp. None of them had been canceled by a post office. The handwriting was unmistakable. A sharp, slanted script that leaned forward as if it were in a hurry to reach the edge of the page. Maya. Elena's breath hitched, a small, sharp hitch that caught in the back of her throat. She reached out, her fingers hovering over the top envelope before finally making contact. The paper was cool and slightly textured. She didn't open it immediately. She looked around her empty living room, at the shadows stretching toward the ceiling, and felt the sudden, irrational urge to put the lid back on and pretend she had never seen it. But the first letter was already in her hand. It was written on the letterhead of the Silver Wing Transit Hotel, Zurich Airport. The date was scribbled at the top, April 14th. I am sitting on the edge of the second bed, the one closer to the window, watching the way the sleet turns the runway into a sheet of hammered silver. You are in the shower. I can hear the hum of the pipes through the thin wall, a steady, rhythmic thudding that feels like a second heartbeat in this small, beige room. It is 3 o'clock in the morning, and we have been stranded here for exactly 11 hours. The desk clerk looked so small behind that massive marble counter when she told us there was only one room left. I saw the way you hesitated, the way your hand tightened on the handle of your suitcase, and I almost said I would sleep in the lobby. But then you looked at me. Really looked at me. I'd passed the professional mask I've been wearing for the last 6 weeks of consulting for your firm, and you said, "It won't come to it." You meant the floor. You meant we were adults, colleagues, 2 women caught in a storm. But sitting here now with the steam beginning to curl under the bathroom door, I realize that everything has already come to it. I am terrified of you, Elena. Not because of your title or the way you can command a boardroom with a single, quiet sentence, but because of the way you looked at me when the flight was canceled. Like you were relieved, like the world stopping was the only way we were ever going to be allowed to stand still in the same place. I'm writing this because if I don't put these words somewhere, I think I might actually break apart. You think I'm the cool, collected translator who can bridge any cultural gap, but right now, I don't even have the vocabulary for the way my own hands are shaking. I'll probably throw this away before you come out. I'll probably pretend I was just checking my itinerary. But for now, you are 3 feet away behind a piece of frosted glass, and I am hopelessly, devastatingly awake. Elena let the paper rest against her knee. The memory hit her with the force of a physical blow. The smell of the industrial lavender soap in that hotel, the scratchy wool of the complimentary robes, the way the light from the terminal across the tarmac never quite went out. She remembered coming out of the shower and seeing Maya sitting by the window. She had thought Maya was sleeping. She had moved quietly, trying not to disturb the silence, never imagining that Maya was vibrating with the intensity of the words she had just scribbled down. Elena's thumb traced the edge of the stationery. She hadn't known. She had spent 72 hours in that room with Maya, and she had thought she was the only one whose heart was hammering against her ribs every time their shoulders brushed in the narrow hallway. She reached into the box and pulled out another. This one was on different paper, heavy, cream-colored stock. It was the second letter. It has been 4 days since we said goodbye at the terminal. I am back in my apartment, and the silence here is different than the silence in room 412. That silence was full of things we weren't saying. This silence is just empty. I keep looking at my phone, waiting for a work email that gives me an excuse to call you, but the project is over. I delivered the final cultural assessment report yesterday. I lied in the third paragraph, by the way. I said the local community was receptive to the new initiative. They aren't. They're scared, Elena. They're as scared as I was in that hotel room. But I wrote what your board wanted to hear because I wanted you to be proud of the results. I wanted to be the person who made your job easier. Is that love? Or is it just a different kind of translation? I keep thinking about the second night when the power went out for 20 minutes and we sat on the floor between the two beds, sharing that overpriced bottle of scotch from the minibar. You told me about the field work you used to do before you became a director. You said you missed the dirt under your fingernails. I wanted to reach out and take your hand and tell you that you don't have to be the person in the suit all the time. I wanted to tell you that I saw the girl who used to dig wells in Mozambique. She's still there. I see her every time you think no one is looking. I didn't say it, though. I just laughed at your joke about the customs agent and took another sip of scotch. I am a coward on paper and a coward in person. It seems. Elena felt a flush of heat crawl up her neck. She remembered that scotch. She remembered the way the darkness had felt like a confession in itself. She had wanted to take Maya's hand, too. She had spent 2 years after that layover wondering if she had imagined the tension, wondering if she was just a lonely woman projecting her needs onto a beautiful consultant she'd shared a room with. She moved to the next letter, her movements becoming more frantic, and the need to know more outweighing the fear of what she would find. The letters began to blur together into a narrative of a year she thought she had lived alone. There were letters from May, June, August. Maya wrote about the mundane, the way the light hit her desk at noon, the specific brand of tea she bought because it reminded her of the breakfast tray they'd shared in Zurich. But between the descriptions of tea and weather were the serrated edges of a woman falling apart. Letter 12 was dated September 3rd. It was short, the handwriting jagged and rushed. It said, "I hate you today. I hate you because you called me to talk about the New Delhi contract and you sounded so professional, so distant, like we hadn't spent 3 days talking about our mothers and our failures and the way the stars look in the desert. You asked me for my rates for the next quarter. My rates? My rate is one look from you that doesn't feel like a transaction. I almost hung up on you. I almost told you to find someone else to translate your world for you, but I didn't. I said I'd send the proposal by Friday. I am pathetic." Elena flinched. She remembered that call. She had been in a meeting with 3 donors, her back against the wall, trying to sound like the director they expected her to be. She had been so happy to hear Maya's voice that she had overcompensated, turning her tone into granite to keep it from trembling. She had thought she was being respectful of Maya's boundaries. She hadn't realized she was building a wall. She reached for another letter, this one from October. It was the contradicting letter. It was 6 pages long, written in a soft, flowing hand that suggested a long, quiet night. It said, "I don't hate you. I could never hate you. I was looking at the photo I took of the sunset over the tarmac, the one where you can see your reflection in the glass if you look closely enough. You look so tired in it, Elena. I wish I'd told you to lie down. I wish I had tucked the blanket around you and told you that the world wouldn't stop turning if you closed your eyes for an hour. I think I'm beginning to understand that you're just as scared as I am. You hide it better because you have to. I'm sorry I was angry. I'm sorry I'm writing these letters to a box under my bed instead of saying them to your face. But how do I say to the regional director of a global NGO, I think I've been in love with you since the moment you tripped over your own briefcase in the lobby?" Elena let out a small, wet laugh. She had tripped. She had been so distracted by the way Maya's hair was windswept from the storm that she'd lost her footing. She had forgotten that detail until this very moment. The letters were a mirror, showing her a version of herself she had long since buried under the weight of her career. She read on, the hours slipping away as the rain outside turned to a soft, rhythmic patter. She found the letter with the date, November 12th. She checked her phone, scrolling back through her old calendar. November 12th, 3 years ago. It had been a Tuesday. She had spent the whole day in a budget review. She remembered it as a boring, standard day. But Maya's letter from that night was a eulogy. "I lost my grandmother today," Maya had written. "She was the only one who didn't care what my job title was. I wanted to call you so badly. I had the phone in my hand for 20 minutes. I thought, if Elena answers, I'll tell her everything. But then I thought about your schedule. I thought about the time difference. I thought about how we only ever talk about contracts and logistics. So I sat in the dark and I ate the soup she used to make and I wrote this instead. Yes, you were probably in a meeting. You were probably being brilliant. I hope you were. I hope someone told you that you were doing a good job today. I'm going to sleep now. The bed feels too big. Everything feels too big." Elena's chest ached. She had been in that budget review, yes, but she had also been thinking about Maya. She had almost texted her that night just to say hello, but she had stopped herself, worried it would seem unprofessional. A false floor dropped quietly beneath her feet. How many times had they both been reaching for the phone at the same time and pulling back out of a fear of being too much? The letters were a map of missed connections, a series of doors that neither of them had been brave enough to knock on. The collection moved into the second year. The tone shifted. The longing was still there, but it was accompanied by a growing sense of resignation. Maya wrote about other people, a woman she met at a gallery, a neighbor who brought her flowers. She wrote about them with a detached kind of kindness, always ending the letters by comparing them to Elena and finding them wanting. One letter, tucked into the middle of the stack, ended with a direct question. It was written on a Sunday afternoon. It said, "Do you ever think about the hotel? Not the storm, or the delay, or the work. Do you think about the way the light looked when the sun finally came up on the third morning? We were standing by the window, ink watching the first plane take off. You turned to me and you started to say something, but then your phone rang and the moment was gone. What were you going to say, Elena? I have spent 18 months trying to finish that sentence for you. Were you going to say you'd miss me? Were you going to ask for my personal number? Or were you just going to tell me that my collar was tucked in? I need to know. I think I'm dying a little bit every day because I don't know." Elena leaned her head back against the wall, her eyes burning. She remembered that morning. She had been going to ask Maya to come to London with her for the weekend. She had the words formed in her throat. "I have an extra ticket. The weather is supposed to be clear there. We don't have to talk about work." But the phone had rung. It was her boss. It was a crisis in the Sudan office. The professional mask had snapped back into place, and she had walked away without looking back. And she had never answered the question because she hadn't known it was still being asked. The letters in the third year were shorter, more infrequent. They were the letters of someone trying to let go. Maya wrote about moving to a new apartment. She wrote about a promotion. She wrote about the way she was learning to live in the silence without filling it with Elena's ghost. But then there was the letter she almost didn't write. It was dated a year and a half ago. It began, "I wasn't going to write tonight. I told myself I was done with this box. I told myself that you were just a beautiful memory from a very stressful week in Zurich. But then I saw a woman on the tube who had your laugh. That low, breathless sound that you only make when you're really surprised. And I realized that I'm still looking for you in every crowd. I'm still translating the world through the lens of what you would think of it. I'm 41 letters into a conversation you aren't even having, and I don't know how to stop. I think I'm afraid that if I stop writing to you, you'll truly be gone. And I'm not ready for a world where you don't exist in some form, even if it's just ink on paper." And Elena's fingers trembled as she reached for the final few envelopes. She could feel the weight of the end approaching. The late letters move around the decision to stop the way someone moves around a room they are about to leave. Or there was no grand declaration of moving on, no final goodbye. Just a thinning of the thread. The penultimate letter was from 6 months ago. It spoke about a garden Maya had started on her balcony. It spoke about the way the soil felt under her fingernails. A callback to what Elena had said in the hotel room years before. Maya was finally doing the field work of her own life. And then, the last letter. Elena held it for a long time before opening it. It was a single sheet of plain white paper. No letterhead, no cream-colored stock, just a piece of paper torn from a spiral notebook. "The roses are blooming today," it began. "The red ones we saw in the terminal gift shop, do you remember? I found a bush of them at the market and planted them in a ceramic pot. They're a bit temperamental, but they're beautiful. I'm thinking of making that lemon chicken recipe I told you about once, the one with the rosemary. I think I finally have the kitchen for it. It's a quiet Tuesday. The sun is out. I think I'm going to go for a walk by the river. I hope you're well, Elena. I hope you're happy. I think I'm going to leave this box in the closet when I move next week. I don't think I need to carry it anymore. You're not a ghost anymore. You're just a woman I loved once, in a hotel room in Zurich while the world was frozen. And that has to be enough." Maya had crossed out the last sentence, "and that has to be enough," and rewritten it underneath. And that is enough. Elena sat in the silence of her new apartment, the letter clutched in her hand. The ordinariness of it was what finally broke her. The lemon chicken. The roses. The quiet Tuesday. It was the life they could have had. The life that had been vibrating between them in the spaces between words, now reduced to a single sheet of notebook paper. She looked at the box. 41 letters. 1,000 days of unrequited honesty. She had thought she knew Maya. She had thought they were friends who had drifted, colleagues who had shared a moment of intensity that had naturally faded. She hadn't known she was the sun around which another woman's heart had orbited for years. She looked at the clock. It was nearly midnight. She thought about the letters, about the way Maya had said she was leaving the box behind, and she had left it for Elena to find. Whether it was an accident or a final silent act of hope, it didn't matter. The knowledge was hers now. She knew Maya better than she ever had when they were in the same room. She knew the anger, the wit, the profound, quiet grief of a woman who had loved someone from a distance and never been told she was allowed to come closer. Elena stood up, her legs stiff from hours on the floor. She walked to the window. The rain had stopped, and leaving the city glistening and raw. She thought about the too late of it all. Was it too late? The letters were old, but the woman who wrote them was still out there. She was somewhere with a balcony and a pot of roses and a recipe for lemon chicken. Elena felt a sharp, cold pulse thrum in her chest. She wasn't the regional director right now. She wasn't the woman in the suit. She was just Elena, the girl who had once wanted to dig wells, yet the woman who had tripped in a hotel lobby because she was looking at a translator's eyes. She went to her laptop, which was sitting on a stack of unopened boxes. She didn't look for a work email. She didn't look for a contract. She went to a search engine and typed in Maya's name. It took 3 minutes to find her. A new consulting firm. A business address in Bristol. A professional headshot where Maya was smiling, but her eyes held that same observant, slightly guarded depth. Elena looked at the address. She looked at the keys to her car sitting on the counter. She didn't cry. Not yet. She just felt a profound, heavy clarity. She went back to the box and picked up the very first letter, the one from the Silver Wing Transit Hotel. She folded it carefully and tucked it into her pocket. She left the rest of them in the box. She didn't need to read them again. She had the map now. She knew where the holes were. She knew where the doors had been closed. She walked out of her apartment, leaving the lights on and the boxes unpacked. The hallway was quiet, the air smelling of fresh paint and old wood. She got into her car and started the engine. The GPS told her it would take 2 hours and 40 minutes to reach Bristol. 2 hours and 40 minutes to bridge a gap that had been 5 years in the making. As she pulled out of the parking garage, she thought about the question in letter 22. What were you going to say? On Elena? She practiced the answer out loud as she drove through the empty London streets. She said it once, then twice, her voice gaining strength with every mile. It wasn't a professional sentence. It wasn't a translation. It was the simplest thing she had ever said. I was going to say, don't go. She arrived in Bristol as the sun was beginning to gray the horizon. She found the street, a row of Victorian houses with small balconies. She walked up and down the pavement until she saw them. A pot of red roses, slightly battered by the previous night's rain but still vibrant against the white stone. She stood there for a long time, watching the light change. She thought about the 41 letters. She thought about the woman sleeping inside, the woman who thought she had left her heart in a box in a closet in London. Elena reached out and touched a petal. It was soft, cool, and real. At 7 o'clock, a light went on in the second-floor window. At 7:15, the front door opened. Maya came out, wearing a thick sweater and carrying a watering can. She looked older, her hair a little shorter, but she was unmistakably the woman from room 412. She stopped when she saw Elena. She didn't drop the watering can. She didn't scream. She just went very, very still. The silence between them was the same silence from the hotel, full of the weight of years, of things unsaid, of the sheer, terrifying proximity of another person. But this time, Elena was the one who broke it. She didn't offer a contract. She didn't ask about a proposal. She reached into her pocket, pulled out the letter on the Silver Wing Transit Hotel stationery, and held it out. "You left this," Elena said, her voice steady despite the hammer of her heart. Maya looked at the paper. She looked at Elena. The shock in her eyes slowly gave way to something else. A recognition, a thawing, a terrifying kind of hope. She set the watering can down on the step. "I thought you wouldn't find them," Maya whispered. "I found all of them," Elena said. "I read every word, Maya, every single one." Maya stepped down onto the pavement, her eyes never leaving Elena's face. And Elena took a step forward, closing the distance that had lasted for half a decade. She didn't think about the board of directors or the time she had lost. Oh, she thought about the roses and the lemon chicken and the way the light looked when the sun finally came up. And, Elena said, I'm here to finish the sentence." Maya reached out, her fingers grazing Elena's sleeve, checking to see if she was real. When she finally made contact, she let out a long, shuddering breath. It was the sound of a woman who had been holding her breath for 5 years, finally allowing herself to exhale. "You're late," Maya said, a small, unshaky smile touching her lips. "I know," Elena replied, reaching out to take Maya's hand. "But I'm here now, and I'm not going anywhere." They stood there on the quiet street, two women who had written 1,000 pages of history without ever sharing a single one. The box was gone, the letters were read, and the silence was finally, mercifully over. The world didn't stop turning, and the rain didn't start again. There was just the smell of damp roses and the warmth of a hand in a hand, and for the first time in 5 years, nothing needed to be translated. Elena followed Maya inside, the door closing softly behind them. On the kitchen counter, there was a bunch of rosemary and a bag of lemons. It was a Tuesday. It was an ordinary day. And it was the most important day of their lives. The letters were just paper now. The truth was in the room. And as Maya turned to start the kettle, Elena realized that the things we never say are only revealing until we finally find the courage to say them. The gap had been closed. The conversation had finally, truly, begun. In the corner of the small kitchen, the light caught the steam rising from the sink. Maya looked over her shoulder, her expression guarded but softening. "Do you want tea?" she asked, the question carrying the weight of a dozen letters about breakfast trays and shared mornings. "Hensi." "Yes," Elena said, I'd moving to stand beside her. I want everything. They didn't talk about the work. They didn't talk about the time they had missed. They talked about the roses. They talked about the rosemary. They talked about the way the light in Bristol was different than the light in Zurich. And as the morning sun filled the room, the 41 letters in the box back in London began to feel like a prologue to a story that was only just beginning its first real chapter. And the letters had served their purpose. They had kept the fire banked when the world was cold. But now, in the warmth of the kitchen, with the scent of citrus and herbs in the air, the fire was finally allowed to burn. It wasn't a dramatic blaze. It was a slow, steady heat, the kind that lasts. Elena watched Maya move, noting the way she still bit her lip when she was concentrating, the way she still leaned forward when she spoke. She was the same woman, and she was entirely new. They were both new. The years of silence had been a crucible, stripping away the professional masks until only the core remained. And the core was this: two women, a shared history of 72 hours, and a future that was no longer confined to the pages of an unsent letter. As the tea steeped, Maya reached out and took the letter from Elena's hand. She looked at the hotel letterhead, a ghost of a frown crossing her face. "I was so scared when I wrote this," she said quietly. I was scared when I read it," Elena admitted. "I was scared that I had missed my chance to be the person you were writing to." Maya folded the paper and set it on the table. "You were always that person, Elena, even when you weren't there, especially then." And they sat down together, the tea cooling between them. The conversation flowed easily now, the jagged edges of the letters smoothed out by the reality of their presence. They talked until the sun was high in the sky, and until the quiet Tuesday had become something vibrant and full. When Elena finally left that afternoon to go back and finish unpacking her own life, she didn't feel the hollow silence of her apartment anymore. She felt the weight of the letter in her pocket and the promise of the one she was going to write that night. This time, she would send it. This time, the words would arrive exactly where they were meant to be. And as she drove back toward London, she realized that the most honest things we ever say are the ones we say when we finally stop being afraid of the answer. The box was empty, but her heart was full. The layover was over. She was finally home. The city blurred past her, the familiar landmarks of London appearing one by one. She thought about the linen closet, about the empty space where the box had been. She would fill it with something else now. New towels, new memories, meant a life that didn't need to be hidden in the back of a cupboard. She reached her apartment and walked inside. The echo was gone. The silence was just silence. She sat down at her desk, found a pen and a piece of paper, and began to write. "Dear Maya," she began. She didn't stop for 3 pages. She wrote about the drive, about the roses, about the way her heart had felt when the door opened. She wrote about the 5 years of missing her, and the 50 years she intended to spend making up for it. She wrote about the lemon chicken. She wrote about the truth. When she was finished, she didn't put the letter in a box. She didn't hide it under the bed. She put it in an envelope, wrote Maya's address on the front, and walked to the post box at the end of the street. She watched the envelope slide into the slot, a small white bird disappearing into the dark. It would arrive tomorrow. It would be read. It would be answered. And that, Elena realized, was the only thing that had ever mattered. The rain began to fall again, a soft London drizzle that cooled the air. Elena stood by the post box for a moment, letting the water touch her face. She felt light. She felt certain. She felt like a woman who had finally finished a sentence she had started 5 years ago in a hotel room in Zurich. She walked back to her apartment, her steps light on the wet pavement. She had a lot of unpacking to do, and she had a life to build. and she knew exactly who she was going to share it with. The letters in the box had been a confession, a slow burn of longing that had survived the passage of time. But the letter in the post box was something else. It was a beginning. And as Elena closed her front door, she knew that the next time she saw Maya, there would be no need for paper. There would only be the two of them, standing in the same room, finally speaking the same language. The 72-hour layover had lasted for years, a suspension of time that had kept them both frozen. But the ice had finally broken. The flights had resumed. And they were both, at last, exactly where they were supposed to be. She went to her bedroom and looked at the closet. It was empty and clean. She smiled, a real deep smile that reached her eyes. She lay down on her bed and closed her eyes. And for the first time in 5 years, she didn't dream of airport terminals or beige hotel rooms. She dreamed of roses and lemon chicken and a woman with a watering can who was waiting for her to come home. The story of the letters was over. The story of Elena and Maya was just beginning. And it was a story that would never need to be hidden in a box again. In the quiet of the night, the city of London hummed around her, a million lives intersecting and diverging. But for Elena, the world had narrowed down to a single path. A path that led to a house in Bristol, to a balcony with red roses, and to the woman she had loved in the silence and would now love in the light. She fell asleep with the scent of the rain in the air and the warmth of the future in her heart. The most honest things had been said. The most important choice had been made. And as the moon climbed higher over the rooftops, the 41 letters in the box became nothing more than a memory, a beautiful, devastating, necessary memory of the time they had spent waiting to find each other. The next morning, Elena woke up early. She didn't feel the usual weight of the day's responsibilities. She felt a sense of freedom she hadn't known since she was a girl digging wells in the dirt. She made a cup of coffee and sat by the window, watching the city wake up. She thought about the box one last time. She thought about Maya's handwriting, the way it slanted forward, always reaching for the next word. She thought about her own handwriting, which was careful and precise, always staying within the lines. They were different, she realized. They were opposites who had ended up in the same place. And that was why it worked. That was why the letters had been so powerful. They were the bridge between two worlds that shouldn't have fit together, but did. She finished her coffee and stood up. She had a lot to do. She had a moving company to call, a job to transition, a life to relocate. It wouldn't be easy. There would be challenges and compromises, and the mundane friction of two people learning to live in the same space. But as she looked at the empty box on the floor, she knew she was ready for all of it. She was ready for the arguments and the laughter and the quiet Tuesdays. She was ready for the roses and the rosemary. She was ready to be the person Maya had seen in that hotel room. The person who didn't need a mask, the person who was allowed to be tired, the person who was loved. She picked up the empty box and carried it to the recycling bin. She let it go without a second thought. It was just cardboard. It was just a container. She walked back into her apartment and started to unpack the first box of towels. She hummed a low, breathless tune as she worked, the sound of her own laugh echoing in the quiet room. She was no longer translating. She was living. And somewhere in Bristol, a woman was waking up to the smell of rain and the sight of red roses, waiting for a letter that was already on its way. The conversation was continuing, and this time, it would never end. Elena felt the sun on her back as she folded the last towel. She looked at the clock. It was 10 o'clock. In 24 hours, she would be back in Bristol. And in 24 hours, she would be with Maya. She smiled, a small, private smile. She thought about the lemon chicken. She thought about the rosemary. She thought about the way Maya would look when she read the letter. It was a good day. It was a beautiful day. It was the first day of the rest of her life. And as she moved to the next box, And she realized that the things we write but never send are the truest things we ever say. But the things we say and truly mean are the ones that save us. She was saved. They were both saved. And the 72-hour layover was finally, beautifully at an end. Description: Elena finds a box of 41 unsent letters written by Maya, the woman she shared a transformative 72-hour airport layover with years ago. As she reads, she discovers the hidden depth of a love she thought was just a memory, leading her to a life-changing decision.